Thank you so much for joining us for this Court Festival event with the authors of the 3 novels that were shortlisted for the Desmond Elliott Prize for First Time Novelists, which is run by the National Centre for Writing in 2020. My name's Sonia Soda. I'm chief leader writer and a columnist at The Observer, and I was also one of the 3 judges for this award last year. And I have to say, we sort of went into lockdown last spring, and then a few days later, 10 novels arrived through the post. And that really kind of defined my first lockdown and helped make it a lot more bearable. One reading through the long list for this prize, including the 3 fantastic novels, including the winning novel, that was shortlisted for the prize. So it really did feel like an amazing prize to be judging at the time of year that we were last year. I've been really excited about this event for quite a while, partly because I actually haven't had a chance to meet or talk to these 3 wonderful novelists yet, because of the way we did the prize remotely, because of the pandemic. This is the first time I'm getting to have a conversation with some of them, with all of them, in fact. So if I appear a bit starstruck, you'll have to forgive me. That's why. So I want to start off just by very briefly telling you a little bit about each of the 3 novels and what we really loved about them as a judging panel. Then I'm going to hand over to the 3 authors to do a brief reading from their work, just to give you a flavour of their book. And then we're going to have a discussion about some of the themes raised. We were incredibly excited about this shortlist, which we think covered such important and contemporary themes in brilliant, moving and creative ways. The first novel on our shortlist was The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abi Daré. We loved the irrepressible energy of this story of 14-year-old Adunni. It's a novel set in and around Lagos, Nigeria, and it's about her struggle against huge odds to achieve her dreams. And this novel covers some really difficult and challenging ground, but it never sort of stops being an uplifting and wonderfully positive book. So we really love that about it. The second novel on our list was The Private Joys of Nnenna Maloney by Okechukwu Nzelu. We loved this book because we thought it was a funny and poignant exploration of the relationship between Nnenna, who's a mixed-race girl from Manchester, and her white mother, and it follows her efforts to grapple with her identity and heritage, which is made all the more complex by the fact she's never met her dad. And then last, but certainly not least, we have That Reminds Me by Derek Owusu, which was the winning novel that won the Desmond Elliott Prize 2020. And this incredible novel tells the story of Kay, who was born to 2 Ghanaian parents, and it follows him, his journey after having been taken into care as a baby, how he adjusts to living with his family again from the age of 11. And one of the reasons why we loved this book so much and thought it was such an incredible literary achievement was we felt like it was reading poetry in the form of a novel, and we thought it was a book where every word matters. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour of the 3 books, but obviously we couldn't do them justice in those sorts of words as a judging panel. So I'm now going to ask each of the 3 authors to give us a short reading from their work. So first of all, I will come to you, Abi, if that's okay, for a reading from your wonderful novel.
Thank you. I'm reading from chapter 29 of The Girl with the Louding Voice. Fact: with over 250 ethnic groups, Nigeria has a wide variety of foods. The most popular include jollof rice, skewered pieces of grilled and peppery meat called suya, and akara, a delicacy of bean fritters. Middle of the afternoon on Sunday, the whole compound is filling with different cars. It's like nothing I ever see. Cars with shape like aeroplane and helicopter, like boats and buckets. Some of them are short with no roof, others are tall like Big Madam's car. All of them are looking too costly. I don't see the women's coming down from the car because Big Madam say I should be weeding the weed in the backyard grass. I ask her why she's wanting me to weed grass on Sunday afternoon. And she pick up a stone from the backyard and use it to knock me hard in the head and call me idiot for daring to ask me questions. As I was pulling the grass in the outside on Sunday, Kofi called me to the kitchen. I'm going crazy here, he said. Go and wash your hands. I need your help. I washed my hands and Kofi gave me a tray full of small fried meat with green pepper and onions with toothpick in the middle of the meats. Here is the stick meat, he said. Take it inside the living room and serve all the women. I looked the tray at the way Kofi arranged the meats in a circle style around the edge of the plate, with one small tomato in the center of the plate. I should just give them the meats, I asked, one by one, and the tomato, what am I doing with that one? That is not a tomato, Kofi said with a sigh. It's a cherry. It's used to garnish the plate. Leave it as it is. Adunni, I beg you, don't touch the food. Do not attempt to pick up the food for anyone. If you touch it, Big Madam will pour it all into the bin and ask me to cook a fresh one. If that happens, Chale, I will skin you alive. So keep your mouth shut, your head down, and hold out the tray and curtsy like this. Kofi bend his knee quick and stand up. I repeat, do not speak to anyone. Serve the food and come back here. Is that clear? Now, where on earth did I put that pot of jollof rice? As I entered the parlor with the tray, I turned to the first woman standing in front of me. Her skin is a rich dark color, shiny, smelling of bitter oranges and firewood. A sharp, strange smell that sliced my nose and causes a tickle. She's wearing a tight green dress, short to the knees area, the round top of her smooth breast peeping from the neck of it. Her hair is low cut, the brown of a tree bark, with one line on the side of it parting from her ears to the middle of her head. Every makeup on her face is green color, except of the blood red of her lipstick. Even her eyes balls are a sharp green. I keep my eyes to the floor as I'm giving her the tray. Who is this one? She asked, talking with a high, cracking voice, the voice of a too much smoker. Florence, is this the new maid you told me about? Oh, she's as useless as they come. Big Madam answered from one corner of the parlor, as somebody laughed from somewhere by the TV. Where do you find them? One woman asked. My eyes caught to her. She's wearing Ankara dress, blue and white, with shine stone around the chest areas. There's a wig on her hair, big and round, as if she gummed her hair on a football and put it on her head. The powder on her face is the orange of the evening sun. Her lips the same brown of the courtship on her feet. From your agent, Mr. Collar, I told you to stop using local agents. You wouldn't hear. The agency I use, Consult a Maid, they get me the best, all foreign. Well, I've told you guys this several times. Big Madam say, Mr. Collar is cheap and reliable. Now, when Rebecca left, he found me this one very quickly. I don't need a foreigner to clean my house for me. All my children are abroad, so there's no fear of her harming them. You people that hire all these expensive Filipino nannies for your children, tell me, do they do better than these ones? All of them are useless. Having white skin and a strange accent does not make you a better worker. I hear some of you even pay them in dollars. Now, why on earth would I pay a housemaid in dollars in my own country and with the current exchange rate? Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Abi. Okay, Chicky, I'm now going to ask you to do reading from Nnenna Maloney.
Thank you. I'm going to read from chapter 13, in which the main character, Nnenna, and her mother, Joni, they're about to go shopping, and they're sort of thinking about their sort of reservations about the idea of going shopping as a mother and daughter together. Chapter 13. So that we may no longer be children, tossed to and fro by the waves, and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness in deceitful schemes. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 14. Generally speaking, Joni liked shopping. Strangely, she had less money for it now than she'd had as a university undergraduate, but she liked doing it when she could. She liked the exercise of judgment, of choice, the augmentation of a small but well-tended collection. She was an astute shopper and sensible. If someone were to examine all her life's receipts, pore over each of her purchases one by one, they would find very little amiss, very few anomalies. One's spending, she believed, represented oneself. And as she had gone through life, she had augmented and adjusted herself accordingly. She had dressed up and down with the seasons of her life, and although she firmly believed herself to be in what was no more than a late summer, and, with the right scarf accompaniment, an Indian summer at that, she had to admit that some changes had taken place. But those changes had all been for the better. The most satisfying element of the shopping experience was knowing that she knew what she liked, and knowing that what she liked now was a sleek, streamlined evolution of what she used to like 10, 15, 20 years ago. Still, through all the years, she'd hung on to a core contingent of essentials upon which she always relied in some iteration or other. Plain, versatile blouses, shoes which were equally suited for office and evening wear, jeans that were hard to come by but whose fit justified the search, the occasional, small impulse buy. It was, at heart, her taste that she most enjoyed, the communion with her exact and final sense of what was right. Nnenna, she had come to realise, did not experience the same degree of joy in communing with her mother's taste. They had tried shopping trips before, and Joni had tried to be forbearing, but the inexorable and urgent truth was that she, Joni, the parent, was deeply, deeply correct. Always. It was, truly, a burden. It would have kept her awake at night if it weren't so blindingly self-obvious. She tried to be kind about how and why she was always right. Nnenna had taken to referring to Joni as a benevolent dictator, but nothing she needed to say ever seemed to be kind enough. Joni was not like Nnenna. Although Nnenna was sensitive, easy to hurt, it was difficult to go over the hurt with her, to get her to admit that her feelings had been hurt at all. The damage, once done, was glossed over, stored away, smiled away. Gradually, joint trips to high street stores had slowed to a trickle. Nnenna made polite but transparent excuses. She invented extra French homework, feigned tiredness and timely foot injuries. At the same time, however, discreet brown cardboard boxes began to arrive in the post like spies in foreign territory, slowly invading their home from the arcane and insouciant world of online. In muted agony, Joni could only watch as their once private club, only big enough for two, expanded to welcome thousands of members she had never met. ASOS, Debenhams, Topshop, arseholes. Joni could never see the clothes first, so she could never offer opinions. She quickly realised that was the point. Reduced to the role of spectator, she saw the new fashions elbow their way into the house. Jeggings, distressed jeans that made her want to weep for her daughter's bare knees, baggy jumpers that seemed like rejects from the wardrobe of a mid-1990s TV presenter. And these are Nnenna's choices. Joni was genuinely happy to see Nnenna bloom and start to discover a sense of her own style, but the problem was, sometimes it was so easy to forget how far apart they were in age. Nnenna, so mature and calm for someone so young, usually, so often seemed older, less fragile than she was, less new. Joni was liable to forget that Nnenna was not, in fact, a middle-aged woman inexplicably trapped in the body of a teenage girl, that Nnenna was still, in many ways, a child. Joni often thought that Nnenna's youth was nowhere more evident than in her fashion sense. If you looked at the things she wore, and Joni often did, askance, something was almost always a bit off. There was always some adventurous impulse gone awry. The faux antique brooch coupled with a crop top, the red socks worn without occasion or justification, the ornamental fan that went, they had both discovered, with absolutely nothing else she owned, and sat resentfully in her wardrobe, emanating regret, but silently demanding she buy the trousers to match. The leg warmers that she hated as soon as she saw them. The baggy, flared jeans that made her feel like a groupie on top of the pops too. She persisted in wearing them, but kept looking down at herself when she did, as though her jeans held some kind of secret, like elephantiasis or a nappy. Joni held, as always, a small hope in her heart that Nnenna was creeping towards a small sartorial maturity, but ultimately she was relieved that Nnenna was not too old for her yet, that, even if she didn't want her guidance, she still needed it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure lots of single mums might identify with that passage. Derek, could I ask you to do a reading from your book now, please?
Sure. So I'm going to be reading from apart from the start, the middle, and towards the end of the book. The color purple. I sat so close to the TV I could hear the static, felt it shuffling around the down on my face. My hands were tightly grasping the covers. I imagined my grip had turned yellow sheets white, mirroring my desire for the fight for breath and bloody choking of Mister. I watched as, fresh from stroking leather, the blade hung in the air, stealing kisses from his Adam's apple. With his head back, Silly moved in close to carve out control while he waits for the first stroke. The blade moist, beads of sweat, fear, instruments even nervous in his presence. The laver, complicit, exposed his skin so all it took was to ignore personal morality and hold your breath as the turpitude took over, cutting open what helped keep his head so high. I sat on the edge of my bed. A bed moved into the living room where robed men sitting for supper watched sand surface in her eyes. My mum was asleep beside me, grinding her teeth as Silly was caught from behind, pulled out of a dream and made to walk back into a nightmare. I fell asleep without seeing it through to the end, but for days after would depict Mister's death with my pen, a dark blue mood, purple was pain, bruised and beaten. Suddenly, it wasn't just my suffering confined to my pad. I wrote Silly out of her story and added her to mine. With the last drops of my ink gave us both a father neither of us had. Sorry, excuse me.
That's all right.
Our flat contained thoughts of God, my dad, and Daniel O'Donnell. Country music called my mum while the homeland had a western hand to keep its culture quiet, its palm giving off the odor of a corroded shovel and dirt. Irish accents in Tree became interchangeable during a sign-obsessed period of British life, and Give a Little Love became more a clutch for capital, a tune dying before most could hear. My mum danced, rhythmic moves beyond the confining Ashanti shuffle, sliding on a tape worn out by thousands of steps, a tape that refused to give up while my mum swayed to its cassette. I sat by the player, watching, in love with fusion of mother and music, my finger raised, ready to take it all back, keeping everything in time, or possibly pause a moment where there was no other life to define. Musical notations failed to splash and leak puzzles. The poverty of home became music with Daniel O'Donnell. My mum called his face the only mirror of virtue, that he sang words like it could never be in their nature to hurt you. The flat speaks its night noises and she responds with her own absent-minded murmurings. The kettle bubbles and the rising boil sounds and brings to mind the waters of Accra, Ghana, a memory of something she never experienced. When will she go back and stand before the tide she imagined as a child? Waters that ignore boundaries and smother sands that eventually lead back to skyscrapers, distant from her and imagined. The Ghanaian garden city of Kumasi, too traditional for a young mind tuned to Western standards of living. The tea is too hot, but she's acclimatized, feeling only a familiar sensation, forgetting to register it as pain. It's 4:30 a.m. The bus comes in 2 minutes, but she'd rather be late than risk toppling over. No one would help her up in the morning mist or the light of her own home. The school in which she works is quiet. You never know children ran up and down these corridors. So attentive is she to the floor, like wiping food from her child's face, showing it a gentleness she's always given but never received. Gospel hums in her throat, the words never coming for fear a teacher might pass and think her unfit for work. It's been 20 years and she's weary, the early morning wind feeling like a breeze visiting the edge of a cliff. Her humming is in sync with her thoughts. Cleaning shit from toilets transforms into arms raised to the sky, praising at the feet of an almighty God. Through everything, there sits her savior. She's finished by 7:30, and as she walks out of the building, a teacher says, "Hello, on your way?" She smiles, no words. Her gentle hum is enough to think all is okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Derek. And that was really brilliant from all three of you. And I hope those sort of short passages gave our listeners, our audience, a sense of, I think, what made each of your three novels a pretty unique reading experience. You know, I felt like reading all three of your books, hadn't read anything quite like all three of them before. I'm just going to sort of, let's have a bit of a discussion now about, so I hope, you know, it won't be papering over too many differences between the books, but around some of the common themes I think there were in your books. And for me, I suppose the thing that really stood out actually was your three books are obviously incredibly different, but the characters are so strong in them. The four characters, if you include Joni. And it felt like each of the three novels in their own way was about those characters' sort of search for self and their identity. And I just wondered if each of you could sort of say something a bit about how you created and alighted upon these characters and how you saw that kind of search for identity through the process of the novel. Who'd like to go first?
I don't mind going first.
Okay, fab. Thank you.
So, I mean, as is, documented that, this book is part or autobiographical. So what I was trying to do when I first started writing it was create a sequence of events that would lead to somebody having a mental breakdown, somebody developing borderline personality disorder. And I wanted to try and make that as realistic as possible. So I make sure that I didn't spare any kind of details, even uncomfortable details when it comes to mental health ailments, mental health issues that people suffer from. And I really wanted to highlight how this affects other people. I didn't want the character to be too self-centered. I wanted Kate to be reflecting on how his behavior has affected other people, how mental health affects other people, the people that care for them and love them. And also how, well, what I believe that everything begins in the first 7 years of your life, and everything after is literally just deja vu. So the way Kay is treated in foster care, being taken away from two mothers, his mother at birth and then being taken away from his foster mother, then you see throughout the novel that he's literally just trying to cling to something, trying to attach himself to something that can help develop his identity. And that's why I was really interested in just kind of like how a person is created, how a person tries to shape their own identity or thinks that they're shaping it, but really it's external factors that are doing that to Kay, essentially, in the book.
Really interesting, thank you. Abi, where did Adunni come from for you?
So she came from, well, I grew up in Lagos. I lived in Lagos for many years, I think the first 19 years of my life. And I grew up in a middle class to affluent environment. And it was very common for young girls to be taken into families and used as housemaids. Now, as a child, I was very curious as a child. I had a lot of questions I wanted to ask, especially around why were many of these girls not educated? Why would I get dressed and go to boarding school? And the girls that were maids for my family and families around us would stay back at home and do the chores. Why would you be able to tell who a maid was if you walked into a restaurant and saw a family of four, three children, and the maid would stand out because of how she looked? And why do we know a lot about our maids, right? So those questions sort of followed me because I grew up in, even though it was, middle class and affluent, there was a culture of silence. And that's something I keep exploring throughout my writing as I realize the silence in terms of you don't ask adult questions, you don't really talk about your feelings, and that leads to a lot of things. But anyway, I left the country, I had my children many years later. And having a daughter that was around about the age of 8 at that time, a conversation with her led me to really think about the fact that girls like her, right? Just realizing that my daughter did not ask to be born into my family where I could afford for her to be educated and live a reasonably comfortable life. And so that conversation that night led me to start researching about the girls that I knew growing up. And there was this particular article that I came across as I researched about a 13-year-old girl who had hot water poured on her. So she had been scalded by the woman who employed her, and her injuries were bad. They were quite horrific. But I think what really struck me was the fact that her face was a blur in this article. And I'd read article after article, and so I'd seen a lot of this girl, but no one seemed to really care about who she was. And so my question was, who is the girl in this story? So I'd come across, like I said, a lot of statistics. I'd seen a lot of stuff, but you can sometimes get desensitized by these information, by percentages and numbers and graphs of child labor and all of that. I wanted to know the girl. I wanted to understand who she was, what her story was. And so when I was writing the book, it was important for me to zone in and focus on the girl who really has dreams and hopes, the girl that wants to be heard. And so that's where that came from. And that's why I made the many choices I did in terms of writing the book and the voice I did.
Yeah, well, I think the reader definitely leaves your novel with a strong sense of who Adunni is, definitely achieves that. Okay, Chicky, what about Nnenna and Joni? Sort of, how did you sort of arrive at those two characters? And what did they say to you about kind of their search for identity and self?
Yeah, so this, although the novel isn't autobiographical, there are things from the novel that I know about from my own experience, if that makes sense. So I'm male and I identify as male, but Nnenna is a female protagonist, and she lives with a single mother, and that's something that I experienced. So I lived with a single mom from the age of like 14 onwards, and at the time, and really now, definitely, there was a huge amount of stigma around being a single mother in the way that there isn't really for being a single father or being a father who is not present. So I remember that just feeling the pain of not really being able to express or have the vocabulary to address that. And so that was just, I guess, on my agenda when I came to sit down and write this book. I had some stuff to say, and I didn't want to do a sort of a PR project and kind of like gloss over the difficulties of it, because it is difficult in some ways. And Nnenna has to grow up quicker than she might have done otherwise if she had two loving parents in her life. But I wanted to give an accurate and fair representation of what it can be like. And then from there, it was really a case of trying to use my imagination and really imagine what could be possible. I wanted to think about how I could be creative and tell a story that was engaging and interesting to read through while just being really just entirely made up. And I had a lot of fun doing that. And it was challenging, but I loved being able to just put stuff out there that felt, to me, that felt authentic, even if it wasn't like from real life as such.
Great, that's really helpful. One of the things I wanted to ask you both about, Derek and Okechukwu, was about the experiences of being a second generation immigrant. It's definitely something I felt in terms of the struggle for identity as somebody who was born in this country, but to Indian parents. So I was really interested in kind of how you both explored that as a bit of a theme in your books. And I was wondering if you could say something about that. Derek, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, sure. That's something that I really wanted to capture in the book as well. The kind of the internal struggle that happens, and as you do search for identity, you do search for a kind of cultural understanding as well. And obviously, Kay being in foster care with a white middle class family, his cultural frames of reference were completely different. When he came over to Tottenham to live with a working class Ghanaian family, and once he realizes that this is his new family, then there's the constant kind of trying to identify. And I guess that's one reason why I put these kind of prayers to Anansi the spider to try and symbolize Kay speaking to Ghanaian culture. Obviously, epitomized in Anansi in folk tale, in folk story, which obviously is like the building blocks of any culture, is the stories that we tell each other. And it's difficult, and me personally, I find it difficult all the time, especially because there's this kind of, am I Ghanaian? Am I British? Am I Black British? I wouldn't go as far to ask the question, am I English? But, those kind of, the struggle that happens within a person who is a second generation immigrant, and it's because of what we have around you, especially with family as well. Do you see what I mean? So, for example, as everybody says, this is obviously something that's always heard, is that, you go to Ghana, you say, oh, I'm Ghanaian, they'll say, no, you're British. You be over here, someone will say, no, you're not British, you're Ghanaian. And you're just kind of like, well, where exactly do I sit? Do I have to then try and create a new identity for myself to try and relate to I guess not even to relate to everybody, to relate to myself, especially when your first language is English. A lot of our parents didn't even bother to teach us. Actually, I shouldn't say didn't bother to. A lot of our parents were too busy to teach us the language that they spoke, or they didn't want to, because they wanted us to fully integrate into British society and therefore speaking Tree. I would ask my mom, why didn't you teach me? And she would just say, what do you need to learn how to speak Tree for? You're in the UK, they speak English here, don't worry about that. But as you get older, you want to connect, especially when you're living in a society that keeps saying things like go back home and all of these kind of things. You kind of think, okay, well, I do want to try and go back home, but let me try and learn the language. Let me try and identify with the culture over there so I can get on a plane and leave. Do you know what I mean? So it's just a constant struggle inside yourself. Yeah. And I did really want to try and put that across in Kay's relating to his family and just, people around him and Ghanaian folklore, Tree and things like that.
Yeah, I've had that same chat with my mum and dad. Why didn't you teach me Punjabi or Gujarati? And again, it was like, it wasn't the done thing so much when I was growing up, because the emphasis was on, you want your kids to integrate. Okay, Chicky, what about Nnenna's struggles with identity? I mean, these really go to the heart of your novel, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I really relate to so much of what Derek said. I think that, it can sometimes represent quite a specific set of circumstances if you grow up in this country as a second generation immigrant who is completely familiar and comfortable with your parents' culture from back home. So many things can knock out of the way that kind of that passing on of knowledge and of familiarity. And, like with Derek, my parents, Igbo was spoken around the house, but it wasn't particularly encouraged for us to speak. And I think they were so passionate about us being able to speak English. Like I remember specifically being told, like, you have to be able to speak English better than English people, whatever English people means. In order to succeed, you just have to be like twice as good to get half as much, and that was made explicit like from a very young age. And look what happened. But I think that really made me aware of. I think that really helped prepare me for writing Nnenna's story, because again, like Derek said, identity is partly something that you find, but it's also partly something that you have to tell people that you are. And in order to do that, you have to be able to tell people who you are. And in order to, you need to know a certain amount and have a certain amount of confidence. And I was just really interested in that very special age that Nnenna's at. She's about to turn 17. And there's such a vulnerable time in your life when you're old enough for people for you to be part of conversations where people are sort of making assumptions about you. And you feel as though you're old enough to be taking part in them and having an active voice, but you don't necessarily know what to say. She's at a diverse but quite white school. She is, her mum is white. She doesn't have any black family that she's in touch with. And there are all these questions that people asking, oh, where's your dad? What's your family structure? What's going on there? And she doesn't really know how to answer them. And for me, that was really the pivotal moment in the novel, in that her boyfriend is white and Nnenna is very, very academically successful, but her boyfriend is not so much, which was an interesting power dynamic for me to explore. And her journey really starts actually when her boyfriend says, oh, you're really great at French, but you don't speak your own language. And it's such a throwaway comment, but I think that kind of being exposed to people's ignorance, I think really sort of lights a fire under you in terms of being able to, what do you answer that with? What do you fill that void of ignorance with when it comes up against you every day? And that was sort of the journey that I wanted her to go on. It's so, it kind of doesn't matter how brilliant you are in school if you're not being taught these things about yourself at school. The journey that Nnenna had to go on is the same for me. Like, I had the stuff that I've learned about my Nigerian heritage is stuff that I've gone away and learned, not stuff that just came to me in a history lesson. So that's part of the big conversation.
Great, thank you. And Abi, coming to you, I guess one of the really strong themes that you've already talked about in your novel is around class within Nigeria. And I guess I'm curious in sort of asking you about how it felt to explore that dimension and to sort of write in the voice of somebody else from a very different class to you yourself, and how you sort of embarked on that.
Yeah, I think that maybe using that voice was what really helped me do that, because the class is something that is thrust upon you from the moment you step on the shores of the country, get out of even from the plane, you can tell the way certain people dress and the way they relate to people. And you go back, when I go back to Nigeria and I'm very polite, if I can say that word, to say domestic staff, you get a look like, why you being like that? You shouldn't be like that, because it gives them wings. So that class, there's a huge class divide. And so writing The Girl with the Louding Voice, not because I felt it was important for me to have Adunni's voice quite authentic. I really wanted to reflect the girls that I knew growing up that were maids, and those girls navigated English language in their own way. Those girls came from a completely different world from me. But if you think about it, they weren't really that different from me, apart from the fact that we came from different backgrounds. These were girls that had dreams and hopes and loved to play and wanted to go to parties and get dressed and all of that. And so writing in Adunni's voice allowed me to kind of divorce myself as an author from the character I was trying to create. And I think that's the only way I could have done that. I think that if I hadn't done that, I would have diluted that experience. And I think even as I was writing the book and her English gets better, I found that I struggled a little bit with trying to understand the demarcation between Abi and Adunni, what she wants versus what I want. And so, yeah, I think that voice was what really helped me, and just realizing that every single thing, I had to describe every single thing from her own point of view. And that voice was a constant reminder to help me do that, to be able to sort of show that huge division in class between the rich and the poor, and even the middle class and the extremely rich, because the gap is widening right now. The middle class is slowly disappearing, and you constantly see it in everything.
Great, thank you. I think another sort of one of the similarities between your book is that they all deal with different types of, but really kind of quite profound trauma in very different ways. But at the same time, all three of them kind of manage to end up being, I mean, they don't gloss over it at all, but they still end up being very sort of positive reading experiences. So I guess something I wanted to ask all three of you as well was, how did you sort of approach kind of handling that trauma within your book? Abi, maybe I'll start with you first this time.
I don't know. I don't know how I handled it. I think for me it was really hard. There was a question as to whether I was even doing the right thing, because again, this is not my lived experience. It's that thing of write what you know. The only thing I knew was that I knew girls that were working as maids, but I didn't get into child marriage. I was never a maid. So, but again, I know that to be able to tell a story and to have it as to have a powerful story, at least from my point of view. I was writing to really to it was my MA in creative writing. I wasn't writing to get published. I was writing to pass my degree course, to get a distinction. That was my goal. And so my goal was to convince my supervisor to believe and to feel that this was a real story. This happened to a real human. And so it was really, I had moments where I remember writing one of the scenes, Adunni's first night as a married woman, and crying after that, because it was for the first time something broke me. Like I'd written a lot of stuff in the past, but nothing had broken me as much as that did. And then, but I emerged out of that thinking I would not delete that. I'll leave it, because if he can do that to me, then hopefully he'll do the same thing to my supervisor. So I think it's just really allowing
And the
your
rest of
vulnerability
us.
to shine through. And then eventually it did happen to the rest. But yeah, just allowing that vulnerability to show in your writing. I think it's one of the things about writing, I guess, it strips you off yourself and it's quite immersive as you get into the character and start writing those quite heavy traumatic scenes. But I think I try to counterbalance that by having her have quite an optimistic, sort of happy outlook to life. I think that was the only way I could have written that book, because the first draft was not, it was devoid of a lot of that, and I just really didn't enjoy that story. And so I had to go back and relayer in her enthusiasm and her optimistic nature. And then I felt better. I was like, okay, now I want to read this. Now I want to understand her story, because I wanted to create empathy as opposed to sympathy. So it was important to get that balance right.
Great. I think I have to say, I think you really did that very well. So, and Derek, maybe you could say a bit about the role of kind of mental health in your book, and how you approached kind of writing so much of that in your book, with all the trauma that involves, particularly because it's it's an issue that's very close to you personally.
Yeah, I didn't have any issue writing the trauma. I didn't find it difficult, obviously, because this is semi-autobiographical. I had all of the material to hand. I think what I found difficult was injecting the narrative, well, at the end of the narrative, with something optimistic. Because I remember the ending was completely different. I remember I gave it to my editor, and he just sent it back to me and said, "You can't end the book like this. You have to change it, because it's too unrelenting." So I remember what I did was I would sit down and listen to a song called "Optimistic" by a group called Sounds of Blackness, and just listen to that and try and get myself into the right headspace to say, okay, how can we round this off in a way that is not me deviating from my original goal with the novel, but allows the reader to come to their own conclusion about the ending. And so, I managed to do that. I mean, what I hope I managed to do that at the end. But yeah, the main issue I had with writing the trauma was, I guess, kind of how much detail do I put in? How much detail do I give the reader? Because of course, we can't yet put trigger warnings on books. And my goal is never to make anyone feel uncomfortable. But at the same time, some of my goals for the novel was actually to make people uncomfortable and ask questions about themselves and the people around them. So in the end, I just decided to, not hold anything back and just go as far in as I possibly could. But that was an internal conflict that I had with myself in terms of how best to depict the many symptoms of borderline personality disorder. That's what I found difficult. Not the writing itself, but how much to give to the writing.
Thank you. Okay, Chicky, what about Nnenna and the sort of her trauma?
Yeah, I was really interested in this narrative in looking into how trauma is intergenerational and how if the relationship between a parent's happiness and a child's, without sort of giving too much away for anybody who hasn't read it, Joni experiences her own trauma around the relationship with Nana's father, and has experienced trauma before that in her life. And she, like anybody, she brings all of her life to bear when she has a child. So I was really interested in what happens there and how that's passed on and what is processed and what isn't. But I also really wanted to write a funny book, and I wanted to be funny not just for the sake of being funny, but I also wanted to, I really believe it's true that literature should help people to enjoy life or to endure it, and I've kind of wanted to do both. I wanted to, be honest about the way that things sometimes work in the world, but also I wanted to write something that was a joy to read. And like from the things that Joni goes through in her past to like Nana's sort of anxiety and the way that she sort of daydreams about people and catastrophizes. I wanted people to be able to look at really difficult stuff and have a laugh at it and conquer it that way, in a way.
Great. Well, I have to say, I actually did laugh out loud when reading the book on more than one occasion. It was really, really funny, even though it was dealing with such serious subjects. I thought you handled that brilliantly. Actually, one thing I did want to ask you was why the choice to go in through two characters? I mean, it was very much a novel of sort of two characters and telling the same journey through the perspectives of two characters, which I thought worked brilliantly. But I was interested in hearing why you chose that approach rather than telling it just from Nnenna's perspective.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I felt that was the most truthful way to tell the story. I think that if I were to try and tell Nnenna's story without really delving into her mum's story, or vice versa, I would only be giving the reader part of this truth, part of the story. If I were to tell Nnenna's journey of self-discovery without telling the emotional story of how she came to be a child in a single parent family, if I didn't sort of make reference to what her grandmother was like, what Joni's mother was like, I wouldn't have been being honest. And for me, actually, the struggle was not sort of writing in another story with Nana's grandmother and maybe even her parents and figuring out all that stuff. The struggle was like cutting it off, because I felt I just thought, that is because that's the way we experience things, isn't it? We might not know it at the time, but we experience our lives because of the lives that have been experienced around us.
Great, thank you. You're all obviously debut novelists. That's how you got shortlisted for this prize, because it is a prize for debut novelists. So I did want to ask you a little bit, because I think people will be really interested about your sort of journey to this place, I suppose. So your path to becoming a writer. And also, I think the three of you have got such different and unique styles. I'm really interested in hearing a little bit about how you develop that style and that voice. So Derek, maybe we could start with you this time.
Yeah, sure. Oh goodness, this is okay. So the
Sorry,
very, very
question.
it is, yeah. Yeah, so Alicia, I never read a novel until the age of 24. I went to university, and like in those movies like Freedom Writers and stuff like that, my university lecturer kind of thrust books upon us, and I was studying exercise science at the time, nothing to do with English literature, but he told us to start reading some Dickens or whatever, so that you can get in the habit of reading scientific journals, because that's what you're going to have to do on this course. There's no practical work on this course, it's all scientific journals. So I went to the library and I just started reading loads of books, loads of classics without knowing they were classics. And it just blew my mind. I just became obsessed with reading and just with language and how people would twist in language. So really, really loved Oscar Wilde. Loved Oscar Wilde. Had like a couple of posters of Oscar Wilde on my dorm room wall, and quotes from his plays and everything. So I just loved what he could do with language. And then I didn't know that obviously I was internalizing all of this. Is why I'm sure this is why loads of established writers say you have to read, 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 read. But I was internalizing a lot of the styles that I was reading. And so anytime I would write something for myself or for like an online publication, I would hate it. I would leave it for like 6 months. I would start writing again, and my writing style had completely changed. And this just kept on happening until I met somebody who literally just said to me, like, just write how you speak or how you think, the way you're thinking. Don't put on a voice. Just write from how you're thinking. And I started doing that, and that just became, I guess my writing style. Not my permanent one actually, because I've just finished another book, and it's written in I would say a lot more accessible way because I was a bit more conscious of the story that I was trying to tell, and I was thinking a little bit about. I know they say don't do that, but I think it's impossible to not think about who's going to be reading your book after you've already published one. You can do that with the first one. With the second one, it's impossible because it's impossible to get those things. You can't throw all of the apples out the basket. It doesn't work. So yeah, my style it should change, and it changes depending on the kind of book that I want to write, or the story I want to write, or the article I want to write. So I wouldn't say I have one permanent writing style that I can pick up on. Mm-hmm. Readers, however, are different. They're able to pick. So I could read something by, for example, Jose Saramago, which is a completely different kind of story, but I know that it's him writing it. I can't do that with myself. It just always seems like I'm doing completely different things. So yeah, sorry, long way to answer that. I don't think I have a particular writing style. I don't think I have one. I think it just changes depending on what it is I want to write, the headspace I'm in, what I've been exposed to during the period that I'm writing a particular kind of book or article.
So interesting. Thank you, Derek. Abi, how about you?
I think I came to writing from, well, I realized when my mother came to visit last year, when she sort of flung our family album at me. And I realized that I think at the age of 5, I used to put speech bubbles on the images and albums and give them dialogue, really. I think that's where that came from. And then I then used to write letters to her because she traveled quite often. And by the time she got back from her trips, I would have said everything that happened around us in the letters I've slid under her door. And then when I came to England, as a student, I started a blog, which I did not realize that was not anonymous. It was a combination of my maiden names then, and I pulled it together, and it became very hugely popular actually. That my mother had been discussed on radio, and she called me and said, "What's a blog? Why are you talking about our lives?" So I shut that down. I realized I didn't like that kind of publicity. I did not like that kind of I think many writers are like that. We'd really just like to be on our own. So I decided but because I had written in that blog and I loved that people reacted to my writing that way, I decided to do something else whereby that I could control, and it was kind of detached from me. So I turned to fiction. And then that went from there. But in terms of writing style, I think for me, it's The Girl with Loud Voice is really distinct. It's not my writing voice. I don't know what my writing voice is, but I think that I love to write really I love to write long sentences. And that's the only thing I can say. I think that my writing, like what Derek said, changes with what I'm working on. My current work in progress is third person, very different story of a young girl, again, growing up in a village, but she's educated. And the only thing I can see is the same need and desire for long-winded sentences. That's the only thing I can see. I think it changes, but maybe other people can spot that. When I don't know if writers can spot their own voice. I can tell what Ernest Hemingway is reading a book versus when Margaret Atwood is reading something. I can tell, but I don't know if they can. So just chiming with what Derek said. I don't know what my style is.
So interesting. Cool. And Okechukwu, how about you? What was your path to debut novelist?
I've really always wanted to write. It's one of the first things I ever really wanted to do. Like literally from being able to write with hold a pen and like form a sentence. I just always wanted to do it. It just seemed like the natural thing to do once I could put letters together into words and put words together into sentences. I guess when I was really little, I just thought that's what you do. You tell the story, and for me, I guess it was a journey of figuring out what you do with a story, what a story can do emotionally, politically, with humor, and all sorts of things, and style, and writers talk about like having a permission moment a lot of the time, where you sort of have like a light bulb moment where you realize, oh, I can do this with books. I can do that. There are writers who just stop you in your tracks, like Toni Morrison, who just show you, amazing things that you can do with literature. And for me, when I was about 19, it was Zadie Smith with White Teeth, realizing that, you could write about multicultural Britain in the way that you'd experience. Like I grew up in such a diverse part of Manchester, and I'd never really seen that reflected before, and certainly not in the way that she had, to really channel this like very British style of humour, like the Ben Elton kind of David Nichols kind of style of quite wry humour, and then to apply that to your life and to what you see. And I really loved that. I thought, if you can do this with books, what else can you do? And I just loved that kind of journey of experimenting and stuff. And I had a lot of fun sort of finding the voice that I wanted to write for that story. But I agree with Abi and Derek, me as well, when I'm finishing my second book now, and the voice is completely different because the story is different, the characters are different, and you mold your voice to sort of sing the song that you're singing, I suppose.
Yeah. Can I just quickly?
Yeah, of course.
So, so I've given it some thought, and I think I don't think I have a writing style. I have particular themes that I will continually write about, and I think that would I hope that makes my work distinctive. That I will always write about Ghanaian Britishness. I have no desire to write about anything else. That's 100% the thing that I'm always going to write about. So yeah, I would say that something that would something that would separate me from a lot of other writers is that I'm always going to be writing about pounding fufu and mashing pepper in a pestle with the mortar and everything like that. I'm always going to write about those kind of things, 100%. So not a style, but I guess kind of stamps. Themes.
Yeah, that makes sense. One thing I did want to ask, and actually I wasn't kind of sure whether to like ask about it, but then I thought, well, maybe we shouldn't let it pass without comment. But like, I'm quite aware as a journalist of colour, sometimes that means you have like the conversation about diversity like thrust upon you as a writer. And I guess we maybe shouldn't let it pass without comment that, it just happens to be the case that this was a short list of 3 black writers. It was a judging panel where 2 out of the 3 judges were South Asian women. So I guess, maybe I'm just interested if any of you wanted to say something. I don't think you need to feel that you have to, about what it feels like to sort of have been a black writer this last year, and how it feels to sort of be thrust at the centre of, to the centre of that conversation about diversity. Is it something you're comfortable with, or does it annoy you?
That's a good question. When I saw the shortlist, I was really happy that I was on the shortlist, but I was obviously happy that the shortlist was an all black shortlist. And again, I think the whole kind of identity thing came to the forefront of my mind, because I thought to myself, oh no, are they going to say 3 West African writers, or are they going to say 2 writers with West African heritage and 1 Nigerian? I thought, how are they going to frame this? And and when I saw some articles saying, yes, all black shortlist, 1 Nigerian writer and 2 writers of West African heritage, I was a little bit hurt. I thought, why couldn't you just say 3 West African writers? Do you know what I mean? So again, when the whole diversity conversation comes in, I just get confused, because I just think to myself, because my themes are heavily Ghanaian British, I think, if you're going to class me as a black British writer, a Ghanaian writer, a writer of Ghanaian origin, what is it going to be? So then it just makes me think that I would really just kind of love to scrap this conversation together. And just call me a writer. But obviously in an ideal world, but I know that's never going to happen. So I do wave the black British flag a lot. But it does feel like it's a futile discussion a lot of the time when it comes to
I think it's tedious. I think it's tedious, and I get it. I understand. I mean, it was great to have three black writers, but I think for me, the concept of blackness wasn't. It felt like I found myself in the middle of it. Right. My adult. I became a young adult in Nigeria where everyone is black. I was saying to my daughter the other day. I said to her, I said, look, we've never had. I've never been in a classroom, maybe mixed race, with another white person. And she was like, oh my mom, wow. She found it quite interesting, fascinating. But it's on the flip side, I find it quite interesting that she's like the minority, so for me, I've always been Nigerian. So coming here, and I really would stop every time I had to fill those forms where you have to tick whether you're black. I would stop for a moment and think, why? Do you understand what I'm saying? Why? So I found it quite tedious, but I get why we need to do it. I get that there's a need to have, if I can say, black stories, black voices, even though as much as it makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable that we're even needing to have that. Do you see what I mean? But I get that. Like Derek said, I'm just a writer that was born in Nigeria, was brought up in, if I was born and brought up in Japan and I was Nigerian, I would probably write stories from there because that's what I know, right? You write what you know. So yeah, I don't know if I'm, yeah, that's it's just me rambling. I just find it quite.
No, that's great. No, that's
Yeah,
yeah, go on.
No, so you finish.
No, I think I'm done. It's just.
Okay. I completely understand what both of you are saying. I think that, Chinua Achebe called it the burden of representation. I think that certainly from my experience as a queer person, as a queer writer, there is that it can be a burden in that things are expected of you, which sometimes have nothing to do with what makes your work do what it does, right? But at the same time, I love that I'm able to do for other people what was done for me when I was young. I remember the first time I read a novel with gay protagonists in. I remember the first time I read a novel with Igbo names in it, because even though I was brought up in this country, even though I was brought up by two Nigerian parents, one from the age of 14, I was brought up in this country where, whiteness is dominant and supreme. So for me to be able to recognize that and to be able to see that in narratives, it meant the world to me. Like, I still remember this feeling of it's like sitting down in a nice warm bath, that feeling of that you recognize the characters that you're reading, and there's no substitute for it. And I'm really passionate. I'm grateful that I'm able to do that. So I do definitely get what you're saying, though. I get it, because sometimes it feels like you're being boxed into a corner that you don't belong in. But I love, I'm really grateful for my publisher as well. I have this profound freedom to write exactly what I want to and have that be championed and celebrated. It's wonderful.
And I think it's totally okay to feel conflicted about it as well, right? I mean, I feel conflicted about it as a journalist. I think, it's sort of a double-edged sword sometimes, I think. Anyway, I think the time has come where we actually need to wrap up. This has been such a fascinating conversation with the three of you. I really hope that our audience have enjoyed it as much as I have. As I said at the start, I've been looking forward to actually meeting the three of you and talking to the three of you for quite a while, ever since I was asked to sort of moderate this event. So, huge thank you to the three of you for your time. I just want to remind the people watching us that all of these three novels are available to buy online from our dedicated festival bookseller. It's Charlie Burns' special Kurt section. I can't recommend all three novels highly enough. You will not regret spending time with Adunni, with Kay, and with Nnenna and Joni. So please do go and purchase the books and enjoy them if you haven't read them already. I'd also encourage people to check out our other events online, which you can do at www.kurt.ie. And finally, if you enjoyed the event, please consider making a donation to the festival, which you can do at www.kurt.ie/support-us. So all that remains is for me to say thank you to our three wonderful novelists again for spending some time with us. And thank you to the organisers of the festival. And thank you to all of you for joining us.